The Latin Alliance. A new power is rising, the tattered glories of old, refreshed with new triumphs and ideas. Revitalized by strong leadership and enriched with the fruits of new technology, the Republic of France has united the League of Italian States, the sovereignty of Spain, and the Kingdom of Portugal into a formidable alliance that is determined to take a seat at the table of the world powers. No longer will they be ignored. No longer will their lands be a battleground for the European nations to settle their scores over. Where there is the will to triumph, victory soon shall follow. Like a phoenix rising from its ashes, the Latin Alliance shall burn away the shame of past defeats, to topple empires and lay waste to those who once sought to dominate them. Victory or death. From Sir Humphrey Atto, Permanent Secretary, GCB, KBC, MVO, MA Oxon, to the RT Hon Richard Bickerton, Pemel Lowndes, GCB, GCMG, PC, 17th of May, 1873. My dear Lord Lyons, congratulations once again on your successful appointment as Special Ambassador to the Elysee. I need not remind you, Lordship, that this particular posting remains one of our most prestigious overseas offices, despite the regrettable turn in French power and prestige. Whilst your Lordship is naturally already completely aware of all that pertains to the current situation in France, it was recommended to me by the Secretary of State that you may gracefully receive a more up-to-date survey of the Latin Alliance and its varied members. Your predecessor's sudden retirement places a certain expectation upon your Lordship for the future. It is therefore highly advisable that you read and memorize as much of this information as possible prior to your arrival in Paris. Some paragraphs within the following pages contain sensitive information, either unknown to your new hosts, or else contains intelligence they do not believe we possess. Were these papers to fall into foreign hands, it would represent a massive blow to our agents abroad and at home, as well as to the office, the government, and the crown. If you have any further questions, please direct them to your personal private secretary, Bernard Tanner Folds, or else to the permanent assistant secretary, to the ambassador Sir James Cutter. Yours faithfully, Sir Humphrey. Enclosed, a summary report on the Latin Alliance and the major powers within it. Under separate cover, a detailed paper on the economic relations between the members of the Latin Alliance. Please do not skim read this. A compilation of the latest regulations regarding all official ambassadorial entitlements, expenses, responsibilities, and duties under the Diplomatic Corps Act of 1847 as amended and updated by the Crown Agents Act of 1852, I have been asked by the Secretary of State to draw your attention to subsections 4, 9, 12, 68, and 149. Duplicate/carbon copy preserved under the State Records Act revised, subsection 43, statutory instrument. Posted under the Crown Missives and Memorandum Act of 1812. The history of the Latin Alliance. Note from the Permanent Secretary. In these times of international tension, it has become necessary that the identities of certain individuals and other facts be omitted or censored in order to safeguard the interests of the Crown. Where this has been necessary, either myself or censored has performed the odious but vital task of suppressing information. A faded glory. No survey on the Latin Alliance can possibly begin without a contemplative glance at the storied history of the once great French nation. Almost as ancient and noble as our own spectred isle, France was ruled through the centuries by a succession of proud monarchs and lesser servants. In the course of its existence, the Kingdom of France fought and defeated, it pains me to admit, nearly all of its neighbors. Indeed, the history of Western Europe could be summarized with a list of French wars. From the Gaulish resistance to the rise of Caesar, the French people or their ancestors at various points in time have been at war with the Spanish, the Portuguese, the Italians, the Germans, the Ottoman Turk, the Russians, and more besides. Of principal note, however, have been French conflicts with us. The longest wars in recorded human history have been those fought between the Crown and the Kingdom of France. From the medieval battlefields of the Hundred Years' War to our more recent scraps against the upstart Emperor Napoleon I, our struggles have proven to be the crucible from which nations are forged and glory is won. Alas, such national rivalries can have but one eventual victor, and it is to our own credit that the crown won out time and again. At Agincourt, Gracie, and the glorious 1st of June, Trafalgar, and more, crown arms and soldiers turned the tide against the French military might and triumphed. Unfortunately, the crown never managed to make political gains out of such short-lived and ephemeral victories. The Kingdom of France endured, and so too did its now tarnished reputation. The Terror of 1789. With each passing year of military defeat and political missteps, the French nobility became more absorbed in their own privileged lives and aristocratic prerogatives. Unable or unwilling to truly serve their monarch, they frittered away power, influence, and wealth without truly exercising it, and their failures bred further abuses amongst their peers and eventually their liege lord. The latter French kings and queens were not individuals worthy of admiration. A failure to plan for the long term gripped their administration, and the regime stumbled from one crisis to another. Whilst on various occasions they delivered blows to their forgotten enemies, not least during the folly of the American Revolution, these triumphs were superficial. The French government bankrupted itself on vanity projects and military campaigns of no real strategic value. When King Louis XVI finally sought wider public support for reforms to fix the ailing French government, his actions precipitated a crisis of world-shattering proportions. The nobility, failing to realize their precarious position, refused to countenance any limits on their own power and lavish lifestyles. The peasantry and urban poor, whipped up by bourgeoisie intellectuals and troublemakers, seized their chance. In an orgy of violence and anarchy, the lily flowers of the French aristocracy were torn down by the Revolutionary National Assembly. To compound events, King Louis XVI and his supporters were executed by guillotine after attempting to escape abroad, while hundreds of thousands of others were similarly punished for their real or imagined support of the monarchy. Note from the Permanent Secretary. Further information can be found in a variety of historical works, although the most useful for government officials is the French Revolution, a history and legacy of terror. The new Republic of France that revolution had established was meant to uphold high ideals of liberty, equity, and fraternity. Although in practice these words proved hollow, attacked by real and perceived enemies at home and abroad, including quite rightly the Crown's navy and army to contain this precious threat, the National Assembly ceded greater power to a dictatorate who would prove brutal and callous in their rule. Burning briefly, burning bright. Regardless of how we may feel about the work and legacy of the French Revolution, it cannot be denied that it brought to the fore some of the best military minds and enthusiasts within French society. One of their number, Napoleon Bonaparte, rose to prominence thanks to the new revolutionary environment and scored stunning success on the field. Note from the Permanent Secretary, even against our own crowned forces, it must be acknowledged. Napoleon's genius soon drew the attention of the dictatorate, which granted him sweeping powers in the campaigns against the coalition formed by France's enemies. His success in conquering Italy, then a stunning operation against Austria, demonstrated some of the finest principles of modern armored warfare. Note from the Permanent Secretary, I am indebted to Major Censored of the Academy at Salzburg for his illuminating paper of the campaigns by the first Napoleon. Napoleon's rise coincided with the waning power of the dictatorate at home, which eventually fell to a coup d'etat that placed 3 consuls at the head of the French Republic, one of them being our erstwhile revolutionary general himself. Consul Bonaparte soon eclipsed his companions at the apex of French government and began acting as an autocratic head of state, one incapable of resisting the impulse to invade and conquer. In the early years of the 19th century, Napoleon began to forge a French empire of his own, first confronting Austria, Prussia, and Italy before attacking Spain. These campaigns, however, taxed French military resources to the limit and created ever more insurmountable challenges. When Napoleon finally declared himself emperor in 1804, he had united much of Europe against him and destabilized many of the oldest nations by his brutal attempts at conquest. On the steps of the Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris, Napoleon was gunned down by assassins we since believe to have been financed and equipped by the Teutonic Knights. Note from the Permanent Secretary, the full details on this report can be found under Censored and Censored at the Censored. As he lay dying, the emperor left behind a cursed legacy. The French government fractured without the dominant personality of Bonaparte, and the country was surrounded by hostile enemies. The French army splintered between the command structure of various generals and commanding officers who sought either to maintain Napoleon's empire or claim it as their own. The resultant civil war dwarfed the violence that had erupted during the French Revolution and lasted for nearly a decade, although by then they had been absorbed into the wider Prussian wars. Bonaparte's forces, the imperial eagles, initially had the upper hand in the civil war after repulsing a poorly executed Austrian offensive into France within a few months of the emperor's death. Then they moved to secure the major centers of industry and population before declaring the dead emperor's brother, Joseph, as Emperor of France. Note from the Permanent Secretary, some claim him as Emperor Napoleon II, but his reign remains disputed. Joseph was a puppet of his generals, and under their influence decided to wage a war of conquest against Spain that tied up much of the imperial forces for the next 5 years. By the time he had declared himself King of Spain, France itself had erupted in revolt. Several marshals, enraged by the continued abuse of imperial power, declared for a restored French Republic and moved to eject the imperial forces from France. By this time, however, similarly motivated forces had arisen, also declaring for the French monarchy. By 1810, all France was divided into 3 parts. The Republic held the northeast, the Royalists the west, and the Imperials the south, as well as their respective Spanish territories. The Prussian Gloria. In late 1810, the forces of the newly formalized Imperium entered the stage of the French Civil War. Crashing into Republican defenses in the east of France, the armies of the Imperium made dramatic inroads onto French soil. In desperation, the Republican forces gave way but dug in around Paris, whilst urgently seeking an accord with the Royalists further west. The war developed into a brutal stalemate that lasted for a further 2 years, masking intense battles behind the lines. French imperial forces, hoping to capitalize on the Imperium's invasion, instead found their support drain away as Emperor Joseph's generals became accused of collaborationist tendencies. Eventually, at the urging of his younger brother, Joseph renounced the French throne for the Spanish one and led a somewhat strange uprising of his Spanish subjects against the army that had made him king in the first place. King Joseph's rebellion shattered the eagles, and many of the soldiers defected to the Republic. The Royalists, meanwhile, faced a fait accompli with the collapse of the Imperialists and signed a peace treaty with the French Republic. By 1830, the French Civil War had come to an end, but its outcome remained in doubt. Much of the Second Republic was under the occupation of the Imperium, and Paris itself was under siege. Help came unlooked for by the French Republic when crown forces under the Duke of Wellington made landfall into Belgium, threatening Marshal Blücher's line of advance and forcing the Imperium's armies to turn aside and seek battle at Waterloo. The subsequent engagement routed the Imperium's armies and shattered their western offensive. Note from the Permanent Secretary, the Crown's intervention checked Imperium ambitions in the west just as the Commonwealth destroyed it in the east. The resultant uneasy peace had since held sway for nearly 60 years. How much longer can that last in the face of renewed Imperium armament? The Eagles Within. The French Second Republic was and remains a shadow of the French Empire and First Republic that it succeeded. Economically and militarily, it has taken nearly 50 years to recover, first from the brutal effects of the Napoleonic Wars, then the French Civil War and the Prussian Wars, all of which unfolded over the course of merely 30 years. The French government remained passive under the governance of the Parti du Mouvement, who attempted to chart a course under the shadow of the Imperium to the east. In 1848, the French Second Republic's popularity collapsed in a wave of European revolutions that rolled across the continent. A new political party named the Imperial Eagles, after the old imperialist faction of the Civil War, made major breakouts in the legislative elections of that year. During the presidential elections of the following year, the Imperial Eagles revealed their presidential candidate, Louis Napoleon Bonaparte, scientist, philosopher, patriot, nephew of King Joseph of Spain, and nephew of Emperor Napoleon I. Louis Napoleon won the election by a landslide and moved swiftly to cement his power in the Republic. The Legislative Assembly and Senate were packed with Imperial Eagle Party members in emergency elections held the following year thanks to the support of masses of rural voters and a healthy amount of intimidation by party paramilitaries. New grandiose public works projects and military rearmament programs propelled the French economy out of the doldrums, such that by 1852, France appeared to have turned the corner. Louis Napoleon shrewdly played up on his interest in the fields of science and technology by becoming a signatory on the charter founding the Covenant of the Enlightened. Though his role as head of the state had relegated him to being little more than a patron of the fledgling order of scientists, it ensured that the French Republic was supported by a steady stream of intellectuals and researchers eager to embrace the new leader's patronage. Forging an alliance. Despite this technological advantage, the new president faced challenges to his dream of rebuilding France. The Prussians and the Imperium remained a dark threat on France's borders, the memory of the invasion still strong. The national humiliation of becoming a battleground for the great powers remained a stain that President Bonaparte wished to exorcise and prevent in the future. Note from the Permanent Secretary. Under no circumstances should you mention Waterloo, the Civil War, or any other event mentioned in this section of the document unless you wish to seriously offend your hosts. French citizens themselves have disappeared for less. The solution, as the new administration saw it, was to secure an alliance of like-minded powers who could act as a counterweight to the surrounding great powers. A ready first partner was found in Spain, where Napoleon's grandniece inherited the throne at the tender age of 7. Pressed by pro-French advisors, the young queen, referred patronizingly in the alliance as the Infanta, declared her great-uncle as her regent, which President Napoleon wisely conferred upon a sympathetic Spanish grandee, the Duke of Cadiz, Joaquin y Mina. Spain and France signed a Treaty of Friendship and Mutual Assistance in 1854, binding the two to support each other militarily and economically. The treaty went further than any of its kind seen before. Note from the Permanent Secretary, I checked the Foreign Office records, and has, to be frank, placed Spain in a somewhat subordinate position to France. Spain's military is largely reliant on the rapidly advancing French technology and expertise to supply it after years of neglect, and the Spanish economy mainly provides raw materials and foodstuffs to France at a preferential rate. Nevertheless, the alliance is popular with Spain's royalist government, which willingly grasps the French business and finance which flow into their country. Armed with an agreement from Spain, President Bonaparte then turned to his other potential partner, the League of Italian States. The League had existed in its fractured form since the end of the Prussian Wars, ruled by the Tetrarchy who jealously guarded their own wealth and influence while simultaneously clinging to each other for security in numbers. Beguiled by French offers of advancements in technology and the prestige that this would bring, the Tetrarchy eventually agreed to join the alliance in 1856, whereupon the coalition of France, Spain, and now Italy was officially renamed the Latin Alliance by a jovial and, some would say cynical, President Bonaparte. The Italian ascension dramatically expanded the power base of the Latin Alliance, outflanking the Imperium's western border and opening a healthy proportion of the Mediterranean to Alliance shipping and naval forces. The Alliance inherited Italian colonies in North Africa as well as their squabble with the Sultanate. The Italians, meanwhile, gained from French manufacturing and military technology in which they subsequently invested the wealth of their banking houses. By 1858, the economies of each member of the Latin Alliance entered a period of sustained and marked economic growth. Note from the Permanent Secretary. See Treasury reports for the years 1858 to 1862. With the Latin alliance growing stronger every year, it was only a matter of time before other powers would petition to join. The Protectorate of Belgium was the first minor nation to seek associate membership, as did Luxembourg and Switzerland in 1858 and 1859. The biggest success, however, came when the Kingdom of Portugal petitioned for membership through the years 1860 and 1861. Whilst not exactly committed partners, the Portuguese government rightly concluded that it was better to be in the Latin alliance rather than share a land border with a revitalized and expansionist Spain. With the Portuguese ascension to the Latin alliance, President Bonaparte declared that his dream represented a new form of geopolitical power on the world stage, the first great powers working together. For too long, world history has been guided by single actors working for selfish ends. Now, we, the citizens of France, Spain, Italy, and Portugal, have recognized as patriots, but also as men, that just as a people come together into a community, so too can nations. The South American connection. The Latin alliance's pretensions to world power status were not taken seriously for several years, even after the ascension of Portugal. Crown analysts considered the alliance to be an association of lesser nations, incapable of truly operating effectively together and being more reactive than proactive in international affairs. This view has changed since the dramatic intervention of the alliance in defense of the socialist unity of South America, usually known as SUSAA, 2 years ago. In that action, Latin Alliance, naval vessels and armed forces repulsed a sizable Union of Federated States expedition into the SUSA territory. The socialist unity of South America grew out of a melting pot of fears, ambitions, and hopes that swept across South America in the years between the fall of the Spanish and Portuguese empires and the rise of the Union to the north after the American Civil War. Note from the Permanent Secretary. This conflict is also known as the Ore War in our wayward American colonies, though as you spent quite some time there with a liaison to the late President Lincoln, perhaps you are familiar with this colloquialism. The Democratic Bond of South America, DBSA, was formed after the Mexican-Union War of 1846. The Democratic Bond was initially a shaky organization, riven with difficulties and disagreements between its Portuguese, Spanish, and native inhabitants, and weakened from the outset by the refusal of the late Simon Bolivar's Gran Colombia to the north to join or support it, mostly because of the DBSA's Portuguese majority population. However, the Democratic Bond acquired a new sense of purpose when the famed Italian patriot Giuseppe Garibaldi arrived in Brazil with a company of followers, the 1850s. Note from the Permanent Secretary. We have extensive intelligence on the hero of the two worlds. Particularly interesting is the Freemasonry dossier from La Sile de la Virtud Lodge of Montevideo. Garibaldi fought for the DBSA's government against the autocratic regimes holding power in Uruguay and Paraguay, which disregarded their people's wishes to join the Democratic Bond. Garibaldi returned to Italy 3 years later as liberal revolutions broke out across Europe and Napoleon began to establish the Latin Alliance. In Garibaldi's absence, the DBSA did not take long to decay. Corruption became endemic, and in time, the Democratic Bond became just as bad as the autocracies it replaced. Note from the Permanent Secretary. The last time Garibaldi would be seen in the Americas was in 1859, when he was in attendance to the Covenant of the Enlightened's Fourth Symposium. In Europe, Karl Marx published the Communist Manifesto, which he had hoped would ignite a revolutionary spirit in its readers. Little did he know that the place in which his idea would be enthusiastically taken up was Latin America, and for reasons which were far more pragmatic than the high-minded revolutionary principles he espoused. Socialist Revolution. It was the effective annexation of old Gran Colombia by the newly emerged Union of Federated States in 1869 that eventually spurred the dissidents of the DBSA to action. The fear that the entire continent would soon be subsumed by another aggressive empire was powerfully given voice by the charismatic Elisabetta Vanez, later known as Elisabetta de Rosa. While a student in San Paulo, Elisabetta had adopted Marx's ideas and had gathered a group of loyal followers along with her sister Indina and set to work spreading the communist message. Despite the heavy-handed attempts by the government to silence her, support grew and grew for her until during the fateful carnival season, when in response to the Union-led massacre in Bogota, the communists seized Sao Paulo's main wireless station and announced a national Marxist revolution. Within a few hours, thousands were on the streets in every major city in the Democratic Bond. The government, caught completely off guard, capitulated in days, and the communists swept in power on a wave of euphoria. Now, Chairman De Rosa leads the socialist unity of South America. Through her powerful oratory and Marxist ideals, she has instilled a strong sense of purpose in what was once a decaying country. The revolution, as she sees it, is bringing progress and prosperity to all of the SUSA. To her credit, she draws no distinction between the disparate peoples who inhabit the country, seeing them all as equal partners in the socialist unity's future. Note from the Permanent Secretary. Regrettably, Senora Rosa now sees her main mission as building up the SUSA's armed forces. This is causing us to revise our own plans for South America. With the Union pressing on the SUSA's northern border and the Celestian Empire's near forcible purchase of a large chunk of cash-strapped Argentina and Chile to the south, the situation is becoming urgent. The SUSA's military forces are numerous, but still quite lightly equipped, although it does operate a small number of, rather obsolete, land ships, mostly purchased by the former DBSAI as scrap from the old United States and then subsequently refitted. With such limited military forces and only a littoral navy to keep the Union from making a coastal invasion, Chairman De Rosa opened a dialogue via the Portuguese ambassador with the Latin Alliance. Though not making the Socialist Unity a formal member of the alliance, the agreement enabled trading of raw foodstuffs in return for industrial equipment and modern weaponry, especially naval and aircraft. The delivery and training of these military investments have required allowing several alliance garrisons, ports, and air bases to be established in the Socialist Unity. There are many in the SUSA committee who believe that this is part of Napoleon's plan to further tie them to his Latin alliance by stealth. Certainly, the influence that these bases have on the local communities make it difficult for Elisabetta to push the more progressive socialist ideals she believes in. Note from the Permanent Secretary. It would appear that, frustrated with what she saw as her sister's betrayal of the cause, Indina had headed north. Ostensibly, one imagines this sojourn is to foster the revolution within the Union, but it is in reality little more than a self-imposed exile, as she has not been heard of from since. The exact nature of the arrangement between the revolutionary government of the SUSA and the Latin Alliance remains a secret our agents have yet to uncover. Nonetheless, it is the opinion of the Foreign Office that President Bonaparte sees this as the perfect opportunity to demonstrate the alliance power while simultaneously expanding its reach. It is perhaps unsurprising that the chosen venue for the intervention is one which has historically had close ties to two members of the Latin Alliance, Spain and Portugal. In truth, with their ideological differences so pronounced, it seems neither party in this treaty is at ease with the other. However, as long as the Union and Celestian Empire remain an acute threat to the fledgling socialist unity of South America, Chairman De Rosa is shrewd enough to have the alliance as allies. It is an absolute priority for the Foreign Office and other ministries of the Crown to determine Latin Alliance intentions in South America. I'm liking this dystopian wars and its lore. It's pretty nice. If you reach this far, please like, comment, subscribe, rate. It helps the channel grow. Nevertheless, I hope you enjoy this, and I'll see you in the next one. Arrivederci.